So we got a bombshell today during what is usually one of the quietest weeks in Washington all year. The House Ethics Committee released its final report on Matt Gaetz, the now former Republican congressman and breakout MAGA star who Trump wanted to be his attorney general. Now, it does cover some things we basically knew before. I mean, we knew from multiple reports that Gaetz had paid women for sex. We knew one of those women was alleged to have been underage. And we knew Gaetz ultimately did not face federal charges for his conduct. But the committee's findings in this 42-page report were still eye-popping and maybe a little too vivid in the level of detail at times. And they assert that Gaetz did likely break the law. Overall, they concluded that, quote, there was substantial evidence that Representative Gaetz violated House rules, state and federal laws, and other standards of conduct prohibiting prostitution, statutory rape, illicit drug use, acceptance of impermissible gifts, the provision of special favors and privileges, and obstruction of Congress. Whew, that's just part of the report. And the gritty details back up a whole lot of the reporting over the years about Gaetz's creepy conduct. It also says, quote, from 2017 to 2020, Gaetz made tens of thousands of dollars in payments to women that the committee determined were likely in connection with sexual activity and or drug use. In fact, according to the committee's investigators, he paid 12 women almost $100,000 during that time frame. Among those women was victim a minor who at the time of her encounter with Gaetz in 2017 had just completed her junior year of high school. Let that sit with you for just a second. In her testimony to the committee, she recalled receiving $400 in cash from Representative Gaetz, which she understood to be payment for sex. And while Gaetz has repeatedly denied engaging in sexual activity with a minor, the report also notes that he refused to answer specific questions relating to his interactions with victim A. In the end, the committee was not at all ambiguous about what happened. They ultimately found that Gaetz violated Florida's state law on statutory rape. The report also detailed the many troubling ways that Gaetz preyed on these women and pressured them into sex. As the committee writes, he took advantage of the economic vulnerability of young women to lure them into sexual activity for which they received an average of a few $100s after each encounter. Also saying, quote, at least one woman felt that the use of drugs at the parties and events they attended may have impaired their ability to really know what was going on or fully consent. One woman said, quote, he would make me feel bad about not having sex with him. Another said their relationship changed over time and came to feel like a task. And another said, when I look back on certain moments, I feel violated. So there is a lot of galling news in this report, a lot of disturbing details. But here's the thing. It really just confirms with more excruciating details what we've long suspected. Given the abundance of reporting about Gaetz we've seen over the years, thanks to lots of great reporting. And yet through all of this over the last few years, all the reporting, all the details, Gaetz has only become more of a fixture in the MAGA world somehow. I mean, Donald Trump nominated him to be the top law enforcement official in the country. The right's most prominent billionaire kingmaker, Elon Musk, endorsed Gaetz for attorney general as, quote, our hammer of justice, and called the accusations against him worth less than nothing. Even after his resignation from Congress, he was still rewarded with a platform on the right-wing cable news network OAN. And just yesterday, Gaetz spoke at an event for Turning Point USA where he mused about running for Rubio's open Senate seat. That's in the future. I mean, just a few hours after Gaetz spoke on that stage, Donald Trump spoke about him in pretty glowing terms.
Friend of mine who I haven't seen in a little while, Matt Gaetz, is here. Where's Matt? He's around here someplace. Matt Gaetz. He's got a big career set up.
That guy I just described in that report, that's Trump yesterday, calling him a friend of mine, saying he's got a big career set up. And here's prominent MAGA mouthpiece Steve Bannon just this morning.
Take the ethics report and shove it up your ass. That's what I think. Gaetz must return like Trump returned. Don't back down. Double down.
Double down. I don't even know literally what he means in this context, which is disturbing. But, I mean, in normal times, here's the thing. Far lesser scandals were career enders. I mean, driving many politicians out of public life with a cloud of shame hanging over their heads. They'd have to return donations. They'd be repudiated by members of their own party. Just Google Mark Foley, learn more. But there have been virtually no condemnation of any note from Republicans. So Trump's party clearly lives by what seems to be a different standard, a lower one. And it's clear, at least for now, that somehow Matt Gaetz still represents the future of that party. Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, and back from her hosting duties last hour is our friend Katie Phang, who agreed to stick around for us. She's also the host of the Katie Phang Show here on MSNBC, and she was a longtime trial attorney and prosecutor in the state of Florida. Thank you both so much for being here with me on Christmas Eve and Hanukkah Eve as well. So, Katie, as I noted, a lot of what is in this report isn't necessarily a surprise. I mean, you know, just the premise of what he did, but there are some new details, some galling details, disturbing details, and the committee has the receipts, so to speak, which I think is pretty important. My big question I've been wondering, and you're the perfect person to ask, is you know the Florida legal system better than almost anyone. What do you think may be jumping out to the state prosecutor, and kind of what's next that you're watching for here?
I mean, the concern that I have is, number one, the statute of limitations that would apply for any crime. I think my frustration and the genesis of it is how much information share was happening behind the scenes between the Department of Justice and the state of Florida. As we know, Joel Greenberg, who is the known associate of Matt Gaetz, who's currently serving 11 years in prison right now for his own offenses. You know, Joel Greenberg also provided cooperation as a part of his plea agreement to law enforcement. And so I would hazard to say, and I want to manage people's expectations, Jen, that if there was evidence that was provided by Joel Greenberg that was corroborated in some way, because there is a concern about Greenberg's credibility, law enforcement has probably received it. I agree there's nothing new, but I keep on emphasizing the size of this report, and I keep on showing this on the air because I want people to understand that this is not just 42 pages of a report. There is actual documentation and evidence that was considered by this ethics committee, and I think that law enforcement, I don't know if they were asleep at the switch. I think there was more than enough probable cause for a number of state felonies that were violated by Matt Gaetz. And I'm stunned that there wasn't more proactivity done by law enforcement. And I would footnote that even though the Department of Justice did not find that federal trafficking offenses were committed by Matt Gaetz when he flew to the Bahamas and he did all this other stuff by flying young girls over to see him allegedly, right, in the state of New York, I have a concern that the Department of Justice didn't cooperate with the House Ethics Committee when it was conducting this investigation and did not provide some of the evidence that it could have done so. I understand that internal policies for DOJ is not to turn over evidence or release it if they don't charge somebody with a crime. But I feel like a fulsome investigation should have been and hopefully was done. But when you look at all of this, Jen, you're kind of left with more than a sour taste in your mouth.
Yeah, this is a horrifying report to read. I don't know how else to describe it. And this is why I asked you the question, Katie, because I think when you hear the conclusion that he did violate laws, it feels like, oh, what's going to happen next? And that's why talking to a lawyer like yourself, it's helpful to expectation set. Let me ask you, Congresswoman, I mean, part of the issue here was that he also delayed this process by not participating, of course, by declining to even respond to the subpoena. I mean, I want to ask you first if you share Katie's frustration, which I watched her talk about on the last hour with the Department of Justice and other authorities who didn't act or didn't information share when they could. And also, Democrats could be back in control in 2 years. Is this kind of a case where you think there could be something done if Democrats regain control? So that's a two-parter, I guess.
Yeah, so I definitely share in the frustration. You know, but one of the things that typically happens when you're talking about something like statutory rape is that there is a longer statute of limitations, because when you start to talk about statutory, you're talking about children, and usually most state legislatures afford children an opportunity to actually grow up and really then talk about it, especially since a lot of times perpetrators are people that are close to them. So I'd imagine that Florida still has time. I don't know as it relates to the DOJ, but obviously Trump's DOJ is coming in, the same DOJ that he wanted Matt Gaetz to sit and reign over. So definitely not optimistic that anything would happen on the federal level. But I think that this was a matter in which the public should be enlightened on regardless as to whether or not he was in Congress or not. And I know that there are a lot of people that are talking about setting a terrible precedent, but I do think that when you decide that something rises to the level of literally statutory rape, because I do think that that is probably the most egregious thing that they have alleged, then I do think that it's important, especially when you have someone that is out there who absolutely could still get, say, another appointment into this administration that doesn't require the consent of the Senate, or someone who is out there saying that they are going to run for U.S. Senate. Now, whether or not the general public in Florida decides to elect him, at least we know that they have the information. We know that they were okay with a sexual abuser ascending to the presidency. So who knows? I really agree with what you said in your opening. It seems like there is no low for MAGA. I mean, they will go out and they will get offended if you are a person of color and you start talking about race in any way. At that point in time, you're somehow race baiting or whatever the case may be, or they can go and say, lock up Hillary Clinton because they're talking about a server that she used. And we know the recent conversations about Trump and the server that they're using as it relates to his transition back into power. It is amazing that they seemingly always want to make up laws to lock up anyone that does not see the world through the orange flavored glasses that they do. But I just think that America really needs to have a reckoning and decide, are we going to be a country that is okay with the lack of morality, okay with the lack of family values, okay with the lawlessness, or are we not? There is no middle ground. We either are or we aren't.